Right then, Forest faithful, what's happening, you beautiful bunch? Welcome back to the channel that brings you the real stories from the city ground. The ones the mainstream media won't touch. The ones that happen behind closed doors. The ones that'll have you absolutely raging by the end of this video. Listen, I've been covering this club through thick and thin, and what I'm about to tell you today will blow your bloody mind. We're talking about 3 massive moves happening right now that could completely transform our season. And I'm not talking about your typical transfer gossip here. This is the stuff that's being discussed in boardrooms, the phone calls happening at midnight, the handshake deals that could make or break our European campaign. Picture this scene. Nuno Espirito Santo sitting in his office at the training ground, phone pressed to his ear, speaking directly to our owner about a player he desperately wants. Meanwhile, across Europe, there's a defender who's been absolutely tearing it up in Serie A, catching the eye of our scouts. And at the same time, and this is where it gets absolutely mental, there's a deal brewing that could see one of our own midfielders head into one of the biggest clubs in the world as part of a swap that'll fund our entire summer strategy. But here's the thing that's doing my head in. While we're all focused on the obvious signings, there's a secret web of negotiations happening that connects all 3 of these stories. It's like watching a masterclass in modern football economics, except it's our club pulling the strings for once. Now, before we dive into this madness, I need you to do me 2 massive favors. First, smash that like button if you're excited about what's coming this summer. And second, and this is crucial, drop a comment and tell me, do you think Nuno's transfer strategy this summer is genius, or are we taking too many risks? Because what you're about to hear will either have you convinced we're building something special or worried we're gambling with our future. The ripple effects of what's happening right now will be felt for years at this club. European football demands a different level of squad depth, a different level of quality, and what Nuno's orchestrating behind the scenes is either pure brilliance or, well, you'll have to decide for yourself. So buckle up, because we're about to pull back the curtain on the most important few weeks in Forest's recent history. And trust me, by the time I'm done, you'll understand why this summer could be the turning point that defines our next decade. Alright, let's start with the story that's got every Forest fan's tongue wagging. And it involves a player most of you have probably never heard of, but who could be absolutely crucial to our European ambitions. We're talking about Jackson Chichoa from Hellas Verona, and the way this deal's been structured is nothing short of brilliant. Now, here's what makes this absolutely mental. Chichoa isn't just any random defender we've plucked from Serie A. This lad has a history with our new signing Dan Ndoye that reads like something out of a football fairy tale. Last season, when Bologna faced Verona, Ndoye came off the bench for the final 15 minutes, full of confidence, ready to make an impact. And then Chichoa absolutely pocketed him, completely shut him down, made him look ordinary. Bologna lost that match 3-2, and Ndoye barely got a sniff. But here's the genius of Nuno's thinking. Instead of seeing this as a negative, our gaffer has turned it into the perfect opportunity. He's looked at how Chichoa handled one of Serie A's most dangerous wingers and thought, I want that player on my team. It's like when you get beaten by someone in a video game and immediately want them on your squad. The numbers behind this deal are fascinating as well. We're talking about $10 million for a 23-year-old who's been absolutely tearing it up in one of Europe's top 5 leagues. In today's market, that's practically robbery. Compare that to what other Premier League clubs are paying for similar quality. Brighton spent $25 million on defenders with half his experience. But what nobody's talking about is the timing of this deal. Sources close to the club are telling me that Nuno specifically requested this signing after watching extensive footage of how Chichoa deals with pace merchants and technical wingers. With European football coming to the city ground, we're going to face some of the quickest, most skillful attackers on the continent. Nuno's not just thinking about the Premier League anymore. He's building a squad that can handle Thursday night matches against teams that'll try to exploit any weakness in our defensive setup. The versatility factor is another masterstroke. Chichoa can play right back, left back, or even slot into a back 3 if needed. With our injury record and the increased fixture congestion, having players who can cover multiple positions isn't just smart, it's essential. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this connects to everything else happening at the club right now. The money for Chichoa isn't coming from our usual transfer budget. No, This is part of a much bigger financial puzzle that Nuno and the board have been putting together for months. What nobody realizes yet is that this signing is actually the first domino in a chain reaction that's about to reshape our entire midfield. And that brings us to the story that'll have half of you absolutely livid and the other half wondering if we've lost our minds entirely. Ibrahim Sangare. Remember him? The midfielder we paid $30 million for, the one who was supposed to transform our engine room, the one who's barely played because of injuries and inconsistency. He might be heading to Juventus as part of the biggest deal in our club's recent history. Now, before you start throwing your phones at the wall, hear me out on this one. Because what La Gazzetta dello Sport are reporting isn't just some random Italian nonsense. This is connected to something much, much bigger. Sangare's time at Forest has been, let's be honest, disappointing. The lad arrived with massive expectations after his brilliant performances for PSV. But between the malaria that knocked him sideways and a series of niggling injuries, he's never really shown us what he's capable of. 27 years old, desperate to get his career back on track. And now Juventus are sniffing around. But here's the thing that's absolutely doing my head in. This isn't Juventus wanting Sangare for the sake of it. This is them recognizing that they need to move players around to facilitate something massive. And we're the ones pulling the strings. Think about it. Why would one of the biggest clubs in the world suddenly develop an interest in a player who struggled for game time in the Premier League? The answer lies in the relationships our club has built over the past few years. Remember the connections with Botafogo through John Textor. Remember how we've managed to navigate some incredibly complex deals. Well, this Sangare situation is exactly the same principle, except now we're dealing with Italian royalty. Sources are telling me that Juventus sees Sangare as the perfect replacement for a certain Brazilian midfielder they're desperate to offload. Someone who's been a massive disappointment in Serie A. Someone who's homesick, someone who's been causing headaches in Turin, and here's where it gets absolutely mental. Forest are positioning themselves as the solution to Juventus's problem. The financial implications are staggering. If we can move Sangare for anything close to what we paid for him, that's $30 million back in the transfer kitty. But more importantly, it frees up his wages, substantial wages, that can be redirected towards a player who might actually fit into Nuno's system. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Are we giving up on Sangare too quickly? And that's a fair question. But let's be realistic here. The lad has had over a year to prove himself. And between injuries and tactical mismatches, it's just not worked out. Sometimes in football, you have to cut your losses and move on. But what makes this deal absolutely genius is that we're not just selling Sangare to Juventus for the sake of it. No! This is all part of a carefully orchestrated plan that Nuno himself has been pushing for. Because the player coming the other way, the one Juventus are desperate to get rid of, might just be the missing piece of our European puzzle. Do you trust Nuno's judgment on this one? Because what happens next will either vindicate this entire strategy or leave us all wondering what the hell we were thinking. And this is where everything clicks into place. Where all the pieces of Nuno's master plan finally make sense. Douglas Luiz. Yes, that Douglas Luiz, the Brazilian magician who lit up the Premier League with Aston Villa, the player who was supposed to be Juventus's marquee signing but turned into their biggest headache. He could be wearing the Garibaldi red before you know it. According to Tuttosport, Forest have broken the deadlock in negotiations, and this isn't just any transfer request. This is a personal appeal from Nuno Espirito Santo himself. Picture this, our manager, the man who's transformed this club from relegation battlers to European qualifiers, picking up the phone and convincing a Brazilian international to choose the city ground over every other option available to him. The numbers are absolutely staggering. We're talking about $40 million that Juventus want, but Forest are playing this brilliantly, offering a loan with an option to buy that could reach $32 and $33 million in total. But here's the genius bit. If Sangare goes the other way as part of this deal, the net cost becomes much more manageable. We're essentially swapping a player who doesn't fit our system for one who could be the difference between European success and failure. But let me tell you why this move makes perfect sense, beyond just the obvious quality Luiz brings. This lad knows the Premier League inside out. He's played at the highest level. and he's desperate to prove that his Juventus nightmare was just a blip. When a player like that has something to prove, when they're hungry to show they belong at the top level, that's when you get performances that can change everything. The tactical implications are mind-blowing. Luis gives us the creativity from deep that we've been missing since we've never really had it at this level. His passing range, his ability to break lines, his set-piece delivery, we're talking about adding a dimension to our play that could take us from being a good team to being a great team. And here's what's really got me excited. The contract terms that are being discussed. $5 million per year plus bonuses until 2030. That's not just a transfer, that's a statement of intent. We're telling the football world that Nottingham Forest are no longer just happy to survive in the Premier League. We're building something that can compete with the big boys. But what really gets me is the timing of Nuno's personal intervention. This isn't just our manager saying, yeah, he'd be nice to have. This is Nuno staking his reputation on this signing, telling the board, I need this player to make my system work. When a manager puts himself on the line like that, you know something special is brewing. The ripple effects of landing Luis would be enormous. Suddenly we're not just Forest anymore. We're Forest with a genuine Premier League superstar in midfield. The confidence boost for the entire squad, the signal it sends to other potential targets, the statement it makes about our ambitions, it's all connected. Think about what this summer has shown us. We've kept Morgan Gibbs-White despite Tottenham's interest. We've signed quality players like Dan and Doy and our Brazilian duo. And now we're potentially adding a player of Luis's caliber. This isn't just squad building, this is empire building. So here's my question for you. Are we witnessing the beginning of something truly special at the City ground? Are these the moves that'll have us talking about this summer for decades to come? Because if Nuno pulls off this triple masterstroke, bringing in Chichua's defensive solidity, moving Sangaré to facilitate the Luis deal, and landing the Brazilian maestro himself, we might just have pulled off the transfer window of the show century. Smash that like button if you think we're building something extraordinary. Hit subscribe if you want to stay on top of every twist in this incredible story, and drop a comment telling me what would landing Douglas Luiz mean for our European campaign. Because mark my words, if this all comes together, we won't just be participating in European football next season, we'll be competing, and that, my friends, is what dreams are made of. What comes next? Well, that's a story for another day, but I can promise you this, it's gonna be massive.